Greetings, folks. You're tuned in with Hodgeboy Hassan from out the East Bay, California, kickboxing teacher and coach from out the East Bay. And you're here for another Montu Art Spotlight. And today's subject is Ezzard Charles, the Cincinnati Cobra. Ezzard Mac Charles was born in Lawrenceville, Georgia, July 7th, 1921 to Alberta and William Charles. After his parents divorced, Ezzard Charles moved to Cincinnati at the age of 9 to live with his grandmother and his great-grandmother, a former slave. A visit to Cincinnati by Cuban boxer Kid Chocolate led Ezzard Charles to consider boxing as a career. Admiring the boxer's sharp suits, the 11-year-old Ezzard Charles realized that fighting would be a good way to earn money. He began boxing when he was 14. Managed by Burt Williams, Ezzard Charles continued attending high school and also worked in a clothing store owned by Max Elkins, who later replaced Burt Williams as his manager. Ezzard Charles graduated from Woodward High School in Cincinnati, where he was already becoming a well-known fighter, greatly inspired by fighters Kid Chocolate and later Joe the Brown Bomber Lewis. Known as the Cincinnati Cobra, Ezzard Charles fought many notable opponents in the middleweight, light heavyweight, and heavyweight divisions, eventually winning the world championship in the latter. Ezzard Charles began boxing as an amateur and won the National Amateur Athletic Union middleweight championship in 1939. During World War II, Charles served in the military and captured the Inter-Allied Light Heavyweight Championship in Rome in 1944. And returning to the ring after his discharge in 1946, Ezzard Charles won all 10 of his fights that year. On the topic of fighting style and legacy, the Cincinnati Cobra, named for his lightning-quick jab and striking accuracy, and as a master technician known for counter-punching excellence, slick defense, and the use of the shoulder roll, which later inspired modern greats like James Toney. On the top of his signature wins, his resume includes victories over legends like Joe Louis the Brown Bomber, Archie Moore 3 times, and Jersey Joe Walcott. And here's a quick breakdown on his key victories. On defeating Joe Louis, the Brown Bomber, in 1950, in his most iconic victory, Ezzard Charles outboxed the legendary Brown Bomber over 15 rounds to become the undisputed heavyweight champion. Now, battles with Rocky Marciano, 1954, Ezzard Charles remains the only fighter to ever take Rocky Marciano the full 15-round distance in their first bout. And in the rematch, Ezzard Charles famously split Marciano's nose in half before being stopped in the 8th round. And on the Archie Moore trilogy of fights, Ezzard Charles defeated Hall of Famer Archie Moore in all 3 of their meetings in 1946, 1947, and 1948, solidifying his status as the premier fighter of that era. On the topic of dominant reign, he was the world light heavyweight champion and later the undisputed heavyweight champion, holding titles between 1949 and 1951. Though he never won the title in that division, he became the undisputed world heavyweight champion 1949 to 1951 and successfully defended it 8 times. In 1949, Ezzard Charles married Gladys Gartrell. The couple had 2 daughters and a son, Ezzard Jr., Deborah, and Leith. In December 1956, Ezzard Charles announced his retirement from the ring, but money problems forced him to return in 1958, but he finally retired in September 1959. He tried his hands at several other jobs. After boxing, Ezzard Charles went into professional wrestling in 1960, though he retired from wrestling in 1962. Out of 122 bouts, Ezzard Charles won 96, 58 by knockout, and was nicknamed the Cincinnati Cobra for the way his body coiled before striking. In a time of larger-than-life boxing stars, Ezzard Charles was an introvert who never got angry in the ring. This did not make for exciting fights and led him to be underrated, despite his obvious talents. Ezzard Charles was inducted into the Boxing Hall of Fame in 1970 and the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 1990. On the top of legacy, recognized for his technical boxing prowess, often mentioned alongside Muhammad Ali and Willie Pep for his boxing intelligence. Several years after his retirement, Charles was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Boxing probably helped delay the progression of the disease, but his fatigue and lack of coordination became evident in the latter years of his career. When Ezzard Charles became paralyzed from the waist down, the boxing community organized an event to pay for his medical bills. The former boxer spent his last days at a nursing home. Ezzard Charles died in the hospital at the age of 53, May 28, 1975 in Chicago, and he was buried in Burr Oak Cemetery in Alsip, Illinois. In 1956, the city of Cincinnati honored Ezzard Charles by changing the name of Lincoln Park Drive to Ezzard Charles Drive. This was the street of his residence at the height of his career. And in 2022, a statue honoring Ezzard Charles was unveiled in the former Laurel Park in the West End neighborhood of Cincinnati. The park was renamed to Ezzard Charles Park alongside the unveiling of the statue. Also in 2022, Ezzard Charles was ranked number 8 in the Ring magazine's list of 100 best fighters in the history of the ring's rankings. Well, that's all on this subject for today. From this time to the next time, peace, salams, prosperity. Be easy.